Chapter 25, The Triple Transformation. The Triple Transformation is a very important chapter in the Life Divine, and actually Sri Aurobindo wrote these chapters much later, after he'd had much higher and deeper realizations. And there is something of a different note and consciousness even in the vibratory mode of these chapters, as you will read. So let's begin. A conscious being is the center of the self. He starts, of course, with this. Sri Aurobindo picks up, from the Upanishads and Vedas, wonderful aphorisms which he translates into English. So he starts with this. And these aphorisms or these shlokas that he translates and puts in front of each chapter, in a sense, give a kind of a kernel of the chapter. They contain in seed what he's trying to say, but also they connect what he's writing with the deepest part of our own philosophical and yogic traditions. So this is from the Katha Upanishad. He says, a conscious being is the center of the self, who rules past and future. He is like a fire without smoke, that one must disengage with patience from one's own body. Just listen to this, very, very deep and profound. Everything is in it. A conscious being is the center of the self, who rules past and future. He is like a fire without smoke, that one must disengage with patience from one's own body. That means that conscious being, one must disengage, separate, become aware of as different from the physical body. That one must disengage with patience from one's own body. This is what the Katha Upanishad is saying about the psychic being. From the Rig Veda, he chooses the following. An intuition in the heart sees that truth. And from the Gita, he says, I abide in the spiritual being, and from there destroy the darkness born of ignorance with the shining lamp of knowledge. And then again from the Rig Veda, these rays are directed downwards, their foundation is above. May they be set deep within us. O Varuna, hear, awake, make wide thy reign. May we abide in the law of thy workings and be blameless before the Mother Infinite. And finally again from the Katha Upanishad, the swan that settles in the purity, born of the truth, itself the truth, the vast. If it is the sole intention of nature in the evolution of the spiritual man to awaken him to the supreme reality and release him from herself, or from the ignorance in which she, as the power of the eternal, has masked herself by a departure into a higher status of being elsewhere, if this step in the evolution is a close and an exit, then in the essence her work has been already accomplished, and there is nothing more to be done. So, Sri Aurobindo starts with a very important statement. He said, if the intention of nature, of the evolutionary nature, is to keep man, the highest status that man needs to arrive, is to merge in the Supreme Being. If that is what the intention of evolutionary nature is, then that has already happened. And no more evolutionary progress would be required, because we have been able to go into a higher state of samadhi, and in the evolutionary context have been able to realize this. However, if there is something more that needs to be done, then the evolutionary nature has another purpose. So he starts with a very important thing. This reminds you of this one statement where somebody asked Sri Aurobindo what about his yoga, and he said, "My yoga begins where the other yogas culminate and end." So this statement points to something else. Read it again. If it is the sole intention of nature in the evolution of spiritual man to awaken him to the supreme reality and release him from herself or from the ignorance in which she, as the power of the eternal, has masked herself by a departure into a higher status of being elsewhere, not on earth, but elsewhere, if this step in the evolution is a close and an exit, that is, an exit out of one's human ordinary consciousness into a higher consciousness, out of existence, into nirvana, moksha. If that is the purpose and intention of nature in the evolution of the spiritual man, then, what does he say? Then in the essence, her work has already been accomplished, and there is nothing more to be done. The ways have been built, the capacity to follow them has been developed, the goal or last height of the creation is manifest. All that is left is for each soul to reach individually the right stage and turn of its development, enter into the spiritual ways, and pass by its own chosen path out of this inferior existence. Clear? So what he says here is that if the end of nature, evolutionary purpose, is the reaching of moksha, or the realization of the spirit outside bodily existence, outside earthly consciousness, then that has already been achieved. The path has already been shown how to go there. Now it remains for each of us individuals to find our own, to get to that stage of development and to find our own route towards nirvana, moksha. What is the other word for it? Shunya, nihil, samadhi. It's for each one of us to find it. That has not happened, but the essence and the path has been shown. So then evolutionary nature does not need to do anything more, if that is the intention. In a way, he's saying that then there is no need for any avatars or any further movement in nature. And therefore, if that is the existence, what Buddha came to show us, what the Hindu philosophy and yoga, the Gita, is showing us, then there is no need for anything further. Life does not need to be divinized, in a sense. The earth need not be divinized for us as individual souls to reach the highest realization of Satchidanand. It is a very high realization. It's not easy. But the path is already shown. The essence of it has already happened. No new consciousness or force needs to be brought down on earth for that path to be taken by those who are ready to take it. Clear? However, now keep listening. See, Sri Aurobindo develops an argument. You have to read the rest of it to understand what he's saying. But we have supposed that there is a further intention. Not only a revelation of the spirit, which is what all the yogas have shown the way of, not only a revelation of the spirit, but a radical and integral transformation of nature. You heard the music when we started, and the earth will be transformed, and the earth will be transformed. You heard that mantra and that prayer? Well, there was a reason why it was put on. So that, if you want that to happen, then something else has to take place. But we have supposed that there is a farther intention, not only a revelation of the Spirit, but a radical and integral transformation of nature. There is a will in her to effectuate a true manifestation of the embodied life of the Spirit, to complete what she has begun. So there is a will in her. In who? In evolutionary nature. To complete what she has begun by a passage from the ignorance to the knowledge, to throw off her mask and reveal herself as the luminous consciousness force carrying in her the eternal existence and its universal delight of being. Okay? It then becomes obvious that there is something not yet accomplished. There becomes clear to view the much that has still to be done. Bhuri aspasta kartavyam. There is a height still to be reached, a wideness still to be covered by the eye of vision, the wing of the will, the self-affirmation of the spirit in the material universe. What the evolutionary power has done is to make a few individuals aware of their souls, conscious of their selves, aware of the eternal being that they are, to put them into communion with the divinity or the reality which is concealed by her appearances. A certain change of nature prepares, accompanies, or follows upon this illumination. But it is not the complete and radical change which establishes a secure and settled new principle, a new creation, a permanent new order of being in the field of terrestrial nature. The spiritual man has evolved, but not the supramental being who shall henceforward be the leader of that nature. So here Sri Aurobindo makes a distinction between the spiritual and the supramental. The spiritual consciousness and the method and way towards achieving the spiritual realization of Satchidananda, where one goes above into the highest spiritual consciousness, has been achieved in the sense that the path has been shown. There are individuals who are living in that consciousness. Their nature has found its root. But the supramental being, which is the next stage that nature is pushing to prepare, has yet to manifest. This is what he's saying here. This is because the principle of spirituality has yet to affirm itself in its own complete right and sovereignty. It has been up till now a power for the mental being to escape from itself or to refine and raise itself to a spiritual poise. It has availed for the release of the spirit from mind and for the enlargement of the being in a spiritualized mind and heart, but not, or rather not yet sufficiently, for the self-affirmation of the spirit in its own dynamic and sovereign mastery, free from the mind's limitations and from the mental instrumentation. So till now, the spiritual root of consciousness, the spiritual consciousness that has been achieved by nature in man, in individuals, it has gone through the instrumentation of the mind, a more and more refined mind to the overmental regions. It's gone through that instrumentation. But the new consciousness will actually transform that mind into another instrumentation, and the mind itself will give way to another kind of consciousness, what Sri Aurobindo calls the Gnostic or the supramental consciousness. That, he says, has still to come as a dynamic principle in the spiritual, evolution of nature, of the earth. Right? So, this is first he is laying out where the yogas have gone, how far the spiritual evolution has taken forward by nature. He's not talking about individuals, he's talking about evolutionary nature. Then he says that this principle has been established of the spiritualized consciousness on the earth, in nature, in evolutionary nature. What has not been established is the supramental principle in the spiritual. That means spiritualization has used the instrument of the mind for its ascension, but it has not been able to get over the limitation and surpass and bring in a new instrumentation so far. Unless that new instrumentation comes in, the supramental manifestation cannot take place. Okay? So, any questions? I hope you will ask me. Otherwise, I take it that you've understood and I shall continue. This is because the principle of spirituality has yet to affirm itself in its own complete right and sovereignty. It has been up till now a power for the mental being to escape from itself or to refine and raise itself to a spiritual poise. It has availed for the release of the spirit from mind and for the enlargement of the being in a spiritualized mind and heart, but not, or rather not yet sufficiently, for the self-affirmation of the spirit in its own dynamic and sovereign mastery, free from the mind's limitations and from the mental instrumentation. The development of another instrumentation has begun, but has yet to become total and effective. It has besides to cease to be a purely individual self-creation in an original ignorance, something supernormal to earth life that must always be acquired as an individual achievement by a difficult endeavor. It must become the normal nature of a new type of being. As mind is established here on a basis of ignorance seeking for knowledge and growing into knowledge, so too supermind must be established here on a basis of knowledge growing into its own greater light. But this cannot be so long as the spiritual mental being has not risen fully to supermind and brought down its powers into terrestrial existence. For the gulf between mind and supermind has to be bridged. The closed passages opened and roads of ascent and descent created where there is now a void and a silence. This is very important. The last sentence. So he says, just like today on earth, in evolutionary nature, mind is an operating principle of our consciousness. You see, like a computer has an operating principle. In the same way, our computers, human computers, operating principle is the mind. Just like mind is pervasive and is a faculty normally seen in normal, ordinary human life, in the same way, mind is a faculty or an instrumentation that gropes from ignorance to knowledge. In the same way, the new instrumentation of the supermind will come or has to come as a normal basis of our life. And the method of the supramental instrumentation, once it is operative, works from knowledge, not ignorance, but from knowledge to greater knowledge or greater light. So from one, the ignorance has disappeared as soon as the instrumentation of mind has been overpassed by this new instrumentation of the supermind. But the supermind operates from knowledge to greater knowledge or greater light. This is what he's saying here. But so now it must become, the development of another instrumentation has begun, but has yet to become total and effective. It has besides to cease to be a purely individual self-creation in an original ignorance. It must become the normal nature of a new type of being. As mind is established here on a basis of ignorance, seeking for knowledge and growing into knowledge, so supermind must be established here on a basis of knowledge, growing into its own greater light. But this cannot be so long as the spiritual mental being has not risen fully to supermind. This cannot happen until the spiritual mental being has not risen fully to supermind and brought down its powers into terrestrial existence. For the gulf between mind and supermind has to be bridged. There is a big gulf, huge chasm between mind and supermind. And that gulf has to be bridged, the closed passages opened, and the roads of ascent and descent created, where there is now a void and a silence. You understand? Okay. This can be done only by, now here comes the main thrust of the chapter. This can be done only. How can this be done? These passages opened, the bridge made, and the roads of ascent and descent created. This can be done only by the triple transformation to which we have already made a passing reference. There must first be the psychic change. Now you understand that when we talk about the psychic change, why is it so important in Sri Aurobindo's yoga? Because without the psychic change, this new instrumentation cannot be developed. And without this new instrumentation, this new life and this new creation and this new being and this new humanity cannot be created. Listen carefully. So therefore, for the gulf between mind and supermind has to be bridged. The closed passages opened and roads of ascent and descent created, where there is now a void and a silence. This can be done only by the triple transformation to which we have already made a passing reference. There must first be the psychic change, the conversion of our whole present nature into a soul instrumentation. So the present nature has to be converted into a what? Soul instrumentation. Note the words. What do you think it means? So let's finish the sentence, then we'll come back. The conversion of our whole present nature into a soul instrumentation. On that, or along with that, there must be the spiritual change, the descent of a higher light, knowledge, power, force, bliss, purity into the whole being, even into the lowest recesses of the life and body, even into the darkness of our subconscious. Last, there must supervene the supramental transmutation. There must take place as the crowning movement, the ascent into the supermind and the transforming descent of the supramental consciousness into our entire being and nature. So, this soul instrumentation is that the whole instrument, the body itself, that is the instrument. What is our instrument at the moment? The physical consciousness, the body, right? That has to be converted into the soul. The whole body's basic consciousness needs to become soul stuff. That means psychicized. That means every part of the being has to be under the influence and under the direct infusion of the spiritual and psychic consciousness, both. So both the descent of the spiritual consciousness through the higher light, knowledge, power, force, bliss, purity, and then going down into the lowest recesses of the life and body, into the subconscious, and then there must take place the ascent into the supermind and the transforming descent of the supramental consciousness into our entire being and nature. So once the being has been psychicized, that means that the physical consciousness, the mental consciousness, the vital consciousness, the outer physical mind, vital mind, every part of our body first needs to be psychicized. That's the first change. So once a psychic being comes forward and becomes the leader and guide of the human, of our own evolution, of evolutionary evolution, then the psychic being influences and guides the outer nature. And every part of our being becomes psychic soul stuff. The instrumentation changes into the psychicized being. It doesn't mean that you will disappear. The body will still remain, but it will be totally under the influence of the psychic. Then, once the body, inner consciousness, the physical consciousness has become psychicized, it actually happens simultaneously. It's not one after the other. There's no linearity there. But when you speak in words in the mental consciousness, you tend to speak in steps. But actually it's happening together. The psychic comes forward, it begins to form a deep, deep pressure and influences and changes the consciousness, the human consciousness. At the same time, there is a spiritual descent of peace, light, purity, power, and there is a ascension of the consciousness. And this descent goes right into the subconscious. And there is an ascension of the consciousness towards the higher spiritual light and supramental. And then the supramental descent comes backwards into the conscious. So that is the whole movement that he's describing. Okay? It is quite interesting, but it is not, this is not something we can read as a, novel. It's quite profound, deep. It's, after a day, it'll go right into the subconscious. We'll lose it all. It goes into the darkness. Then you have to reread it again, then reread it again for it to become part of your consciousness. And then the mind of the cells will also begin to understand it better each time, because you are preparing the cells of your consciousness to even understand this. So each time you read it with a deeper consciousness. So let us continue. This can be done only by the triple transformation to which we have already made a passing reference. There must first be the psychic change, the conversion of our whole present nature into a soul instrumentation. On that, or along with that, there must be the spiritual change. On that, or along with that, please notice, there must be the spiritual change, the descent of a higher light, higher knowledge, higher power, force, bliss, purity, into the whole being, even into the lowest recesses of the life and body, even into the darkness of our subconscious. Now, it's very important. In the spiritual or the yogas of the past, the traditional yogas, there is the ascension of consciousness. There is no moving, coming forward, the psychic. This whole step is done away with. We go straight up. You understand the difference here? What is Sri Aurobindo saying? He's bringing the psychic forward first. That step was missing. That was the link that was missing between what was being done and what for the life divine to happen, for the physical divinity, for a new being and a new earth. The psychic is the most important. Through the psychic only can one go up and the descent comes down. Otherwise, if your psychic is not forward, you cannot have the descent of consciousness. You can go up, but you can't come down. You will either completely shatter because the body is not ready for it. The psychic is what makes the body consciousness ready, the mental consciousness ready, the vital consciousness ready. So, let us continue. There must take place even into the darkness of our subconscious. Last, there must supervene the supramental transmutation. There must take place as the crowning movement, the ascent into the supermind and the transforming descent of the supramental consciousness into our entire being and nature. At the beginning, the soul in nature, So what is the soul in nature? The psychic being. The soul in nature is called the psychic being. Okay? At the beginning, the soul in nature, the psychic entity, or I would say the psychic entity, whose unfolding is the first step towards a spiritual change, is an entirely veiled part of us. So at the beginning, the psychic entity is veiled, it is hidden. Although it is that by which we exist and persist as individual beings in nature. Even though we exist by that and persist, because it is the psychic entity that travels from life to life. So this persistence is a beautiful word. Even though by that we exist and by that we persist. You see, there's no death. The psychic entity is moving forward. So even though it is that is continuing from life to life, from body to body, all the time. So at the beginning, just see how beautifully the sentence goes. At the beginning, the soul in nature, the psychic entity, whose unfolding is the first step towards a spiritual change, is an entirely veiled part of us. Although it is that by which we exist and persist as individual beings in nature, the other parts of our natural composition are not only mutable but perishable. You understand? The mind perishes, the vital perishes, the body perishes, becomes dust. But what continues is the psychic being. Even though the other parts of our natural composition are not only mutable but perishable, but the psychic entity in us persists and is fundamentally the same always. That is why we recognize each other from life to life. You understand? If your psychic is in front, you will recognize. You will know. Now, when monk comes back, we'll recognize him, right? Because his psychic is going to be in front. Now, and ours are in front. So, the psychic being is the key. That is why Sri Aurobindo says here, the psychic being is that which evolves. And the bringing forward of the psychic being is the central secret and central, key to this yoga and for transformation. Because if your psychic being is alive and active and forward, you will recognize people when you see them. When you see a photograph, you will see who that person is. When you see somebody on the road, you will remember, oh, I met you, or I know this person. Or when you meet somebody and there's a great affinity towards that person, without even knowing who that person is, never met them in your lives, you will know. It is the psychic that recognizes. It depends how evolved your psychic being is and how much in front it is, how much it has been able to dominate your consciousness. Therefore, the bringing forward of the psychic is the central key practice in this yoga. Okay, then at the beginning, the soul in nature, the psychic entity, whose unfolding is the first step towards a spiritual change, is entirely veiled. We've read that. But the psychic entity in us persists and is fundamentally the same always. It contains all essential possibilities of our manifestation, but is not constituted by them. It is not limited by what it manifests, not contained by the incomplete forms of the manifestation, not tarnished by the imperfections and impurities, the defects and deprivations of the surface being. The psychic is not tarnished by the outer nature. Okay? Is not tarnished by the imperfections and impurities, the defects and deprivations of the surface being. It is an ever pure flame. It is an ever pure flame of the divinity in things, and nothing that comes to it, nothing that enters into our experience can pollute its purity or extinguish the flame. However bad, however dark the life can be, nothing can pollute this flame. Nothing can extinguish it. This is the nature of the psychic. So, not contained by the incomplete forms of the manifestation, not tarnished by the imperfections and impurities, the defects and deprivations of the surface being. It is an ever pure flame of the divinity in things, and nothing that comes to it, Nothing that enters into our experience can pollute its purity or extinguish the flame. The spiritual stuff is immaculate and luminous, and because it is perfectly luminous, it is immediately, intimately, directly aware of truth of being and truth of nature. It is deeply conscious of truth and good and beauty, because truth and good and beauty are akin to its own native character, forms of something that is inherent in its own substance. So you see always the psychic, the true, the good, and the beautiful are the three signs of the emergence of the psychic entity in us, in life, and in nature. True, the good, and the beautiful. So the beautiful is the physical, the truth and the good are the vital and the mind. So you can see the three attributes of the psychic nature and the psychic being is truth, goodness and beauty. Is that Satyam Shivam Sundaram, that film? Okay. What I'm trying to say that is, this is, you see, it comes back to the old, there is a connection somewhere. These are the eternal verities. But somewhere, I think, there was a certain evolutionary impetus which was required. And when that has now fulfilled itself, this, which is the divinization of human nature and outer nature, is the next step in human evolution. Now, this spiritual stuff is immaculate and luminous, and because it is perfectly luminous, it is immediately, intimately, directly aware of truth of being and truth of nature. It is deeply conscious of truth and good and beauty, because truth and good and beauty are akin to its own native character, forms of something that is inherent in its own substance. It is aware also of all that contradicts these things, of all that deviates from its own native character, of falsehood and evil and the ugly and the unseemly. But it does not become these things, nor is it touched or changed by these opposites of itself, which so powerfully affect its outer instrumentation of mind, life and body. So once you have the psychic presence in front, the psychic being active and influencing the outer nature, you become aware of both the shadow and the light, the truth, the good and the beauty. But you also become aware of your own defects, of your own shortcomings, of the issues and problems that you have to overcome, and of life and darkness. It is not that you are in some Google land or cuckoo land of living in your own world. You are certainly aware of everything, but you do not get influenced by it. It does not drown you. It does not encompass you. You can see it, you can step back from it, and you can start rejecting it if you wish. So this is the psychic nature. It is aware of everything. It is aware of the truth. It is aware of falsehood. It is aware of beauty. It is aware of the ugliness of life. It is aware of the light. It is aware of the darkness in ourselves, in others, and in the world, in evolutionary nature. But it is not drowned or influenced by it. It does not lose its essential character of divinity. So that is when the psychic is forward. So you will notice when there are times when you feel very close to the light within you, to that some presence within you that guides you, close to your birthday, around about that time, when you had the samadhi, when you're having darshan days. And you will notice on those days that you get intimations, which you may get in sleep, or you may get when you're quiet or in meditation, of something that is telling you something that don't do this, or listen to that. That is the psychic voice, intimation that will tell you. That because it knows, if you can follow it. And then the power can come through that when you pray. Sometimes the will is not strong enough. You have to strengthen your will to be able to do that. Okay? So, this is what it's saying here. For the soul, the permanent being in us, puts forth and uses mind, life, and body as its instruments, undergoes the envelopment of their conditions, but it is other and greater than its members. If the psychic entity had been from the beginning unveiled and known to its ministers, not a secluded king in a screened chamber, the human evolution would have been a rapid soul outflowering, not the difficult, checkered, and disfigured development it now is. But the veil is thick, and we know not the secret light within us. So, if the psychic entity, the same entity, had actually not been a secluded king, meaning a king that is in seclusion, and its ministers, the outer nature, not knowing who the real king is, if it had come forward earlier, then human evolution would not have been so difficult. However, it says, the veil is thick, and we know not the secret light within us, the light in the hidden crypt of the heart's innermost sanctuary. Intimations rise to our surface from the psyche, but our mind does not detect their source. See here. Intimations rise to our surface from the psyche, but our mind does not detect their source. It takes them for its own activities because before even they come to the surface, they are clothed in mental substance, thus ignorant of their authority. It follows or does not follow them according to its bent or turn at the moment. If the mind obeys the urge of the vital ego, then there is little chance of the psyche at all controlling the nature. So if the mind obeys the urge of the vital ego, then there is little chance of the psyche at all controlling the nature or manifesting in us something of its secret spiritual stuff and native movement. Or if the mind is overconfident, to act in its own smaller light, attached to its own judgment, will, and action of knowledge, then also the soul will remain veiled and quiescent and wait for the mind's farther evolution. For the psychic part within us is there to support the natural evolution, and the first natural evolution must be the development of body, life, and mind successively. So the psychic part within us is there to support first the natural evolution. And the natural evolution is first there of the body, life, and mind successively, and these must act each at its own kind or act each in its own kind or together in their ill-assorted partnership in order to grow and have experience and evolve. So the psychic being the psychic part or entity tends to first support the development of our body, of our vital emotional being, and of our mind. First, this development has to take place. Until then, it is quiescent, means that it remains behind for this development. It guides it without showing itself from within. And this development is very important so that we can become a human body, a human being, a fully individualized human being. Otherwise, we will be like what? Amoeba. Okay. So, for the psychic part within us is there to support the natural evolution. And the first natural evolution must be the development of body, life, and mind successively. And these must act each in its own kind or together in their ill-assorted partnership in order to grow and have experience and evolve. The soul gathers the essence of all our mental, vital, and bodily experience and assimilates it for the further evolution of our existence in nature. But this action is occult and not obtruded on the surface. In the early material and vital stages of the evolution of being, there is indeed no consciousness of soul. There are psychic activities, but the instrumentation, the form of these activities are vital and physical or mental when the mind is active. For even the mind, so long as it is primitive or is developed but still too external, does not recognize their deeper character. It is easy to regard ourselves as physical beings or beings of life or mental beings using life and body, and to ignore the existence of the soul altogether. For the only definite idea that we have of the soul is of something that survives the death of our bodies. But what this is, we do not know. Because even if we are conscious sometimes of its presence, we are not normally conscious of its distinct reality, nor do we feel clearly its direct action in our nature. As the evolution proceeds, nature begins slowly and tentatively to manifest our occult parts. She leads us to look more and more within ourselves, or sets to initiate more clearly recognizable intimations and formations of them on the surface. The soul in us, the psychic principle, has already begun to take secret form. It puts forward and develops a soul personality, a distinct psychic being to represent it. So it begins with a psychic entity, and then the psychic being comes forward. So the psychic entity is different from the psychic being, because the psychic being is the formed being of the psychic that comes forward. The psychic entity is more the spark, or the spark of the psychic, more like a influence rather than a full, complete being. So the psychic being, when it comes forward, also has within it the inner mind, the inner vital, and the inner physical around it. That's the psychic being. There's a distinction between psychic being and psychic entity. So we'll do this next time, I think, for the time being.